Good evening, I'm Mike, and today we're going to go over the next chapter in Kotter's book, Leading Change. In previous chapters, Kotter introduced some of the steps that lead towards a change management process, and in chapter 6, communicating the change vision. Previously, a vision was created by a guiding coalition, and now it's time to communicate that vision. So once individuals have an understanding of the goals and direction, now it's time to get the word out. But is it enough to just give a motivating speech or maybe sending a memo by email? Is that going to be enough to let a couple of managers know in all the information that they have to receive every day, this is our vision? What about those day-to-day tasks? What about that sense of urgency for what needs to be done now, especially all those fires that need to be put out? Where's the sense of urgency going to be about communicating this vision if there's more urgency, it seems, to take care of those everyday tasks? How are we going to start taking those steps and communicating that to other employees? First-line managers are inundated with so much information, and employees, they hear so much information that hearing a memo or a little talk about a vision is probably not enough to really have it stick in their minds and make it part of their work habits. Oftentimes, management may not even be comfortable with future-oriented visionary thinking, but they may be more focused on the routine, factual information and not so much on the strategizing and dreaming part. So some of the effort that goes into this communicating this change, of course, you have to address the status quo. And there's a lot of resistance there. It's not enough just to have a strategy consultant come in and say, well, these are the things that we need to do to move the organization ahead. And then we're just going to let people know this is what they have to do. But is that enough to drive lasting behavior change? Or is there going to be a need to communicate a vision that's handed down to managers who can also remind individuals of how their work is connected with that vision? Oftentimes, whenever a change management team comes into play, they might think that, here's a vision, and we're going to implement it quickly. We're just going to let people know what to do, and we can get everything done in a short amount of time. But for a vision to really take effect, of course, it has to be clear, simple, and it has to be disseminated to a large number of people. It can't just be given to the management where they might just forget about it, but it has to be communicated. And of course, that takes time, it might take effort, it might take resources. For example, in order to do more employee training to guide an organization in a different direction, there might be a need to spend a few hours or maybe a whole entire weekend training an employee on what the new way of doing things are. So you multiply that by a few hundred, a few thousand employees, how many working hours is that now you have to pay or not have productive work hours in order just to train a lot of people? What's a better way of doing this? And that's what Kotter mentions later in this chapter. So some of the elements which are key to effective communication of the vision. He points out several points here, but I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll let you read them yourself. But he does mention again that it has to be simple. not something complicated where it's not relatable. It has to be repeated. It can't just be that memo that goes in the email and then the employee just kind of deletes it or doesn't understand it. And there has to be two-way communication, maybe some give and take. It's more powerful when employees or members of that organization feel like they have a part in fulfilling this vision. It's not just a directive. So I'm going to quote a couple examples of some visions that Kotter mentions in kind of a humorous way. A version 1 might say, through a process of debureaucratization, we will empower our frontline employees to better serve idiosyncratic customer requirements. That's a lot of jumbo talk there. But for example, he says this is an example of a more concise vision that people can understand and relate with. We are going to throw out some of the rule books and give employees more discretion to do the right thing for our customers. Just an extreme example there of how a vision ought to be without a bunch of technical terminology and keeping it relatable and simple. So some of the ways that we can communicate this vision, besides just sending out a memo or having a meeting, one-on-one informal talks is one way. For example, a leader might encourage or empower management to insert information about that change process or that vision into everything they do. So they're having a one-on-one talk with an employee. Now they're bringing up, well, this is how this connects to our vision. Or they may even be joking a little bit, in a kind of an unstructured, format, like maybe out to lunch, and joke around about, yeah, this is going to help our vision, and just keeping that in mind. And people are understanding that what we're doing is contributing to that vision. It's not just a directive that was on an email, but it's being included in everyday conversation about how we're going to implement these changes. So Kotter says to repeat, repeat, repeat. In one case, maybe a new vision is given in a few speeches and a few articles, and then it's dropped. Another case, every one of 25 executives pledges to find opportunities to talk about those visions and how it ties into what we're doing. For example, monthly reviews or quarterly reviews with employees, assessments, performance evaluations, maybe answering inquiries. If there's a question from a customer or a coworker, answering in a way that ties into that vision, keeping it at top of mind instead of just forgotten about. These brief mentions can allow more momentum to build, and it's a lot less expensive than paying or taking people out of work for a weekend and taking out thousands and thousands of hours of work to train up just for a weekend that may be forgotten. Instead, this method of communicating and repeating over and over, finding opportunities to share the vision. One point that Kotter mentions is if there's a discrepancy between how management acts and what the vision is said to be, then that can be a major way of undermining progress. Because people need to believe that senior management is committed to this change as well. And if they see the key players are not on board or their activities are inconsistent, then they're going to start to doubt and maybe not put that much effort into making those uncomfortable steps to make a difference. One example that Kotter gives is that having overly flamboyant meetings or maybe office spaces and saying that we need to cut costs, but at the same time, senior executives are in environments where they're disconnected from employees, disconnected even from customers. And they're just, everything looks luxurious, but actually they're not in touch with their employees. And then when somebody visits their office, maybe their desk is at the end of a long row of hallways, or they're very distant. That communicates a different message than we're going to work together as a team, or that we need to cut costs, or we need to address, meet the needs of the customer. But at the same time, the environment itself is saying something differently. In a fast-moving world, people need to engage not only their minds, but their hearts in order to transform the firms that they're part of. And any mixed signals need to be eliminated. One way to deal with mixed signals is just to be plain in talking about it. Just discuss it openly and have a mutual understanding of what's going on. One thing that Kotter mentions about a change, upon communicating it, is that people will not necessarily accept it without having the opportunity to question it, to be listened to, and to grapple with it. It's one thing to say this is the vision and be directive, but it's another way to have that two-way conversation so that people have the opportunity to be heard and listened to, understood. And that way they have time to process and grapple with it, to validate, and to be on board. If people don't accept the vision, then it's very difficult in the transformative process to move on to the next stages, which Kotter mentions, which are empowering broad-based action and creating short-term wins. And this is the reason why the vision itself may need to be reworked in order to avoid heading off in a wrong direction, or a direction that people will not be willing to follow.